These are two of the leaders of bringing our economy together at this crucial time. Two of the leaders in terms of expanding our markets. I think of Premier Eby's recent trip to India. Premier Smith, most places I go, you've just been.
Alberta is our #1 trading partner in Confederation, and building that trade, supporting each other, finding a path forward is crucial.
We also have so much common ground on developing LNG, ammonia, expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and also interties, nuclear, and getting an integrated electricity market. So we don't always agree on everything, but I think we've got a really solid base to start on.
Prime Minister Mark Carney attempting to sort of broker peace on Parliament Hill today. He met with both Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and British Columbia Premier David Eby to talk trade and major projects. The two premiers have clashed on pipelines after the federal government pledged to prioritize an Alberta bitumen pipeline to the Pacific in an MOU signed back in November, to the dismay of Premier Eby. It led to a significant war of words, with Eby calling it not a real project with no private sector proponent, while Smith previously characterized Eby's opposition as un-Canadian. Here's Premier Eby after that meeting.
The tone was very civil in the meeting and borderline friendly. I've been very clear with Premier Smith and with the Prime Minister that I believe that the tanker ban off the coast of British Columbia is there for a reason. I've made it clear to the Prime Minister and to Premier Smith that the process was backwards. We should have all been at the table at the beginning. British Columbia was not. I think that was very unfortunate. But we have to move on. You know, Alberta is an important relationship for British Columbia. Relationship with the federal government is crucial. And so we're going to respect our differences on this file and try to find ways to work forward together.
How likely is it that the premiers can come closer to some sort of agreement on that pipeline after this two-day huddle? Let's bring in our front bench. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst and former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Jamie Ellerton is the principal at Kanaptis and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Next to him, that's Sebastian Skamsky. He was former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And with me here in studio is Laura D'Angelo. She's with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Sharon, I'll start with you. Like, I can't think of how many times we've heard these two premiers talk at each other, to each other, about each other on this file. This rhetoric, particularly that last clip from Premier Eby, is like a total, it feels like a 178 away from what we've heard before. What do you think's going on?
Well, I never thought I would heard a premier say that it was borderline friendly.
That's my favorite line.
I gotta say, the tone and tenor is a lot better than what we had seen a few weeks ago, and I think the tension is natural considering Alberta and BC's difference of opinion here. I think Prime Minister Carney is doing what he has to do as the leader of the Federation, is bring them together. Even Danielle Smith, her approach and how she spoke, and that was friendlier than what we would have expected given the two having a disagreement. But listen, again, we have this situation where we've got a U.S. trading partner who is not reliable, and we need to work better together amongst provinces. So we need Alberta and BC to work together. There are always going to be differences there, but there's going to have to be a way to find a bridge. And I think that's what Carney was trying to do today.
It does feel like when they're all together in the room, Jamie, the rhetoric is very different than when they're reacting to things separately that might not, in their view, be to the interests of, in line with the interests of their provinces. Do you see that changing in a tangible way at all? Because I think it's one thing to say, well, this is just one irritant. It's another thing when that pipeline gets put before, you know, the federal government and they make a decision, let's say, to approve it, to say the same thing.
Yeah, it looks like Prime Minister Carney's first ministers' meeting was, to use an old term, a worthwhile Canadian initiative. I think the fact that you have Premier Eby and Premier Smith talking constructively, that kind of photo op, of course, is always a bit theater. It's where everyone gets to go and get the photo for the papers and the evening news and get their clip across to their respective regional markets. But the real substance after the fact, I think, was probably the most encouraging to it. I think when you listen to what's happening right now, we recognize that we're living in a very turbulent times. And there's a pretty broad cross-partisan consensus for that. And then when you come back to the BC specifically, you look at the poll numbers right now, these aren't things that are like volatile. Canadians are resoundingly in favor of expanding access to markets for pretty much all Canadian products and goods, and that includes Canadian energy. And so although the historical pipeline politics that really drove so much of what went on in the Federation from 2010 to 2020 into 2025, all of that changed last year. And I think what you're seeing is Premier Eby see the writing of the wall, look at the realpolitik of this, and is going to find ways to ensure that the concerns of like progressives who are kind of anti-development across the board are heard. So this is done in the most responsible way, and probably extract a few concessions that'll benefit his province explicitly in a way that's not just GDP numbers, but at the same time get out of the way. And I think one of the things that Mark Carney is doing quite effectively is giving each premier across the country a way to save face and get something that they want to advance their provincial agenda while keeping the national interest moving in the right direction.
Do you think that's the way it shakes down? It all sounds like very much like it would make sense, Laura. The only thing is a lot of the things that Jamie just put forward were things that existed 2 months ago when Premier Eby was like very upset at the prospect of this even being discussed.
They did, and something that struck me in what Jamie was saying was that last little bit. The Prime Minister is so far showing himself to be actually quite an adept operator around this First Minister's table. He's really showing his, small p politics here. He seems to be very good, at least when they all come together, at bringing the premiers together, bringing them along, and making them feel like they are an essential part of this process, which they obviously are. But that seems to be what changes. And it keeps striking me, it sounds so silly, but it keeps striking me that it's like any relationship, right? When it's just over text or you're just hearing about it from your friends, you feel terrible about it, everyone gets mad, you make up the stories and the angles in your head and you talk it to death. And we're hearing the results of that, and then you all get together and sit down and have a conversation, and all of the sudden things move along and they feel different. And that certainly seems like what happened today, which sounds very basic, but also could just be true, right? It seems like Eby is understanding all of the sudden, to Jamie's point, pipeline politics have changed. We're in a trade war. Everything has shifted, and so all of the sudden, other things are going to have to change. And maybe there's going to be big things on the table that Premier Eby wants that the Prime Minister is all of a sudden going to be open to if he can find a new rhetoric around a pipeline.
I suppose like the ultimate proof, Sebastian, will be in when all of this materializes, what happens then? Because we still are kind of talking about it in the ether, but like there's no actual proposal that Alberta submitted yet. They say that's going to happen in June.
Exactly, Vashi. I mean, the proof will be in the pipeline, so to speak. I think, look, it's encouraging to see Prime Minister Carney is moonlighting as a therapist between the premiers providing such apt counseling. But I think it's important to remind Canadians and your viewers that there's one person in that room that holds all the cards, and that person is Prime Minister Carney. He's the one who has the sole jurisdiction to push through projects like this. British North America Act, I believe it's Section 92 that permits him to do this. So while I appreciate that we're reconciling the feelings of Premier Eby and Premier Smith, and obviously they represent two different constituencies that should be heard, the ball is really firmly in Prime Minister Carney's court, and it's time for him to actually go through with this, get out of the way in many instances, and in many of the regulations that remain in place that prevent these projects from being built, ironically, and proceed. So let's see when that actually happens. I hope, for the sake of Canadians, that it's sooner than later.
Yeah, he said in the House that yesterday, it was interesting because that was the line from Mr. Poilievre, right? Like this whole fight over who should get out of the way. In the response from the Prime Minister was that the MOU would build a pipeline to the West Coast. So we shall see.